We're proud to welcome you to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series, brought to you by the Investments in Wealth Institute. Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell, the editor of the Institute's Retirement Management Journal. The goal of this series is to help you better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and enhance your ability to communicate those differences. This episode is brought to you by the Investments in Wealth Institute's Women in Wealth program, which aims to empower women in the financial sector and help advance the professional capabilities of women in the industry. Learn more about Women in Wealth, upcoming events, and how you can get involved by visiting iwicentral.org/Women in Wealth. My guest today is Kate Healy. Kate is the Managing Director for Generation Next at TD Ameritrade Institutional. In this role, she is responsible for helping solve the talent crises confronting the industry by opening the RIA career path to fresh faces, including new graduates, career changes, military veterans, and other groups that aren't traditionally represented in the financial advice field. So, welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thanks so much for having me, Bob. I'm excited.
A pleasure. So before we get going, for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind giving us a brief overview?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been with TD Ameritrade for about 12 years now, and really a lot of the focus has been on how do we help the next generation. And I was doing it off the side of my desk while I ran marketing for years. And about 3 years ago, we decided that this was so important of a topic, we really needed to make a statement. And so Tom Nally asked me if I would take on this role, and it's head of Generation Next. And one of the reasons we call it Generation Next is because when I talk about the next generation, I'm not just talking about young people. I'm talking about anyone who's not here today. So to me, Generation Next is Generation Y and Z, but it's also women, it's people of color, it's career changers, and it's people returning to the workforce after being out in the military or raising a family. So it's a really broad way for us to help bring more people into this fantastic profession.
How exciting. It really sounds quite exciting. I'd love to switch jobs with you for a day.
It's quite busy, trust me.
Yeah. So speaking of busy, the Investments in Wealth Institute has been busy with respect to an initiative described as Women in Wealth, the mission of which is to become the fastest growing and leading provider of certifications for women in the financial industry. One objective is to help create more and more, they described as disruptors, by offsetting the costs of earning advanced certifications for approved applicants. And to that end, the WI offers several scholarships, including the Investments in Wealth Diversity Fund, which is offered to qualified individuals who can demonstrate financial need and are from underrepresented populations, and also the Women in Wealth Fund, which is geared toward empowering women in the financial sector. And to date, about 80% of all the scholarships awarded have gone to women in wealth and underrepresented populations. And before we dive into the topic at hand, I should mention to our listeners that there's an upcoming event, a Women in Wealth webinar, in which the long-term implications of COVID-19, Women in Wealth Perspective, will be held on September 22nd, 2020, from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And in that webinar, Women in Wealth will discuss the long-term ramifications of today's current events, including the impact of financial planning, how business models may change, the complications of incorporating new business models, and client communication issues such as counseling clients through retirement and investment risk. And for more information, you can all visit www.investmentsandwealth.org/WIW. So with that as a backdrop, Kate, do you mind giving us a sort of, I guess, your take on what I've just described with respect to the Institute's initiative with Women in Wealth, and also provide us with a sort of a state of affairs with respect to women in the financial services profession / industry, and with respect to D&I efforts, and including the next gen that you mentioned before.
You know, it's fantastic that the Investments in Wealth Institute is offering scholarships because, you know, it's necessary for all of us to invest in the future. And we want to make sure that people are getting the certification. So I think I applaud you all for the scholarships that you're doing, especially around women in wealth and the diversity scholarships. And also I noticed, I was reading the scholarship report, and I see that you've also been awarding advisors in transition scholarships to people who have been affected by COVID-19, whether it's through health reasons or because they've been displaced from their jobs. So kudos to the Institute for that. I think it's phenomenal to really keep investing in the future. But it's interesting. We have this fantastic career, and you talk to anyone who's in this industry, and they love what they do. And so it's always kind of this. Um, it's a little strange when you think about why people don't enter the industry, because when you talk to someone who's here, it's fantastic. And we know we've got this perception problem and an awareness problem. So I think, one of the things we've got to do first is tackle the awareness. And so with what you're doing with the scholarships and with the Women in Wealth, it's also allowing women to be more visible. So, when you look at your scholarship report and you see all these faces of women who have received your scholarships, when you're looking at you're Googling women who have investment backgrounds, and women who are on your committees and the Women in Wealth events are popping up. It's allowing people to see that there is a place for them in this business, and that's very important. I think we've also got to take a look at what we have from a perception perspective, right? We did a survey last year of 2,000 students, career changers, advisors, and professors of financial planning to find out what were some of the things that kept them back. And, all of the people trying to enter the profession, career changers and students, said, a couple things. One, it's all about selling and it's all about math. And the numbers piece, it's maybe not what I'm interested in right now. And then when we talked to advisors and said, what are the traits that you're looking for when you're hiring people? Number 1, 2, and 3 were people skills, entrepreneurial skills, and wanting to provide great client service. That those kind of the fears that other people have didn't even enter into it until you went further down the list. So a lot that we have to do to change that perception. The other thing that I think keeps people from taking a look at financial services as much is we often talk about the shortage of women in financial services. We talk about the lack of women advisors. Depending on if you're reading a Cerulli report or CFP board, there's somewhere between 13% and 22% women, 23% women in this industry. And the reality is that's not true. We have a much larger percentage of women. That's just the percentage of women who are advisors. 46% of financial services are women. And so what we need to do is start to look and talk about the women who are in different roles. For years, as we've talked about financial planning and the investment industry, we only talked about the people who were client facing out there really selling the product to someone. And the reality is, as we've grown this profession, there is such a need for professional management and such a need for more people in a lot of different roles that we forgot to count them when we talked about the statistics around women. And so there are people who are running the businesses as operations managers, chief operating officers, marketing directors, compliance folks, trading people, technology people that aren't getting counted in the numbers. And I think we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice there, because if I'm a woman entering this business and I look and I see that it's only 15% women, maybe I say, it doesn't sound like it's a place where I can be successful. Maybe I don't want to have that fight. So maybe I'm not going to enter this profession. But the reality is 46% of women, 46% of the profession is women. So there are a ton of people that you can bond with and work with and learn and grow from, as well as from the men in the profession. But I do think that we need to start to change a little bit of how we talk about it so that we are not unintentionally pushing people away from the profession because they just think it's not a place for them.
Do you think that a branding or a public awareness campaign would go a long way to presenting women in those positions that you described, compliance officer, marketing director, et cetera, as a way to sort of demonstrate to women that it is a place for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a marketing background, I think it's one of the great things that we can do. So there are some campaigns out there. As more and more firms become national and they are starting to have advertising campaigns. Some of the associations have advertising campaigns, and they're really kind of doing this day in the life. The challenge with any advertising is it's incredibly expensive to change perception. So to change a brand perception, to change a perception about an industry, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it does take a large effort. And so I think the more that we can get together and work on these things together, the better off we'll all be. And we also have to start to look at different avenues, right? When we're looking at the next generation, where are they? Where are they absorbing these ads? It's not television, right? So where are we looking? Are we on TikTok? Are we on Instagram? Are we doing YouTube videos that are, being embedded into the channels that students are using when they're studying for college? There's a lot of different things. When we're looking for career changers, how are we, are we going to the Forte Foundation, which is women MBAs who may be looking to return to the workforce, really targeting those different places. When we're talking about adding diversity, are we in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, or MSIs, minority serving institutions? How are we showing up? How are we bringing what we do to them? And how are we showcasing that this is a great career for people? So there definitely is a room for, one of the things I tell people is the best thing you can do when you're in this profession is tell everyone what you do. Go to your child's career day. Go to the local high school and talk about it at a career fair. Go to your local colleges. If they have a financial planning program or a finance program, great. If they don't, ask to speak to people who are in the business classes. If you're looking for financial planners, look outside of people in business and economics. Look for the people who are what we call the helpers. If they don't know about this, they couldn't study it, right? So they may be studying sociology, they may be studying teaching or psychology or social work because they wanted to help people, but they had no idea that financial planning existed as a way to help people. So going into those different majors and having a chat with those classes, mentoring people who are in college. I talk to students a ton, and I always tell them, if you reach out to someone in this business on LinkedIn, they're going to reach out back to you. They're happy to have that conversation as long as you're respectful of their time and you come with an agenda. This is a helping industry, and people want to help not just their clients, but they are interested in helping the next generation. We've just got to get better at putting people in different locations and making sure that where we are speaking is not just to our own networks, but really expanding out and talking to people that we might not have talked to before to expand the network so that we are bringing in more diverse talent than we've had in the past.
Hmm. So I recently had a chance to talk to Bob Glovsky, who I know you know well,
Yeah.
and we talked about the notion that at least in the client-facing side of the world, where there are only, I believe, 25% of the women are financial professionals who are dealing with clients. Any thoughts about what we can do to sort of have that mirror the general population at large? Have it mirror, say, 50% of advisors are women?
Yeah, one of the things I often say to advisors who come up to me and say, Kate, I've been listening to you, and you're right, I need a woman. I need to hire a woman advisor. Can you help me? And I said, well, it's not that easy, number one, because we know we have a shortage of them. But number two, why don't you turn around and look within your own firm? Because you may have women there that you can develop. This industry is hard when you start out, right? Especially depending on how you started out. If it was in a sales culture, if you had to come in with a list of people's names and your relatives, it kind of sets people back and they say, maybe this isn't a place that I want to be. But once you start working in this profession, whether you're working in a firm, you may be working in client service, you may be working in operations, you may be working in marketing. But as you start to see what advisors do, I think women especially had a confidence gap. And when they start to see what advisors are doing, they think, well, I'm great at relationships. I could do this. And as they get more comfortable with working within a firm, I think there's an opportunity to turn around to someone who's been with the firm a couple of years and ask them. Not everyone's going to want to be an advisor, but that doesn't mean you can't ask someone and say, hey, when you think about your career plan, would you ever be interested in being more client facing, having client relationships, maybe moving on to become ownership of the firm? And then how can we help you get there? So I think it's really important for firms to really turn around. We don't do a great job of developing talent in a lot of our businesses here because we're smaller, but it's so important. So I think turning around within your business and looking and helping people develop, and then looking and offering support for certifications like the SEMA, the retirement plan advisor, things like that, really helping to support your teams, whether that's giving them time to study, whether that's giving them a budget to have continuing education, or even just to join the organization and go to, well, someday maybe go to events again when we can travel, but join
Right.
virtual events and join networking groups. It's so important that we are really focusing on developing talent, because I promise you, it is so much cheaper to develop the talent you have than to have to go out and find new talent.
Mm. So the other thing that people constantly talk about in this D&I world is making the business case for diversity and inclusion. Do you have mind sharing your thoughts about the business case?
Yeah, I mean, there's twofold, right? Number one, it's the right thing to do. So there's that component of it. But from a business case perspective, as you look around the world, as you look around this country, the demographic shift is happening. It's happening now. So by 2044 or 2045 or 2050, depending on which researcher you listen to, we are a majority minority country. In 10 states, including New Jersey, where I live, it's already happened in school-age children, so that there's no one majority of any race. So as an advisory firm, if you are not starting to develop relationships to hire people who are different than you are not going to be able to develop relationships to work with clients who are different than you. So it's important from the sustainability of an advisory firm to make sure that they are bringing diverse talent into their firm for a couple of reasons. One, as I just mentioned, to help you from a client-facing perspective. We know that clients do have a preference to work with someone like themselves. That doesn't mean they always have to, but they are more comfortable thinking someone has had shared life experiences with them. So that's one piece to it. The other piece is thinking about when you bring diverse talent into your business, is really being inclusive. It's great to just have diverse talent, but that's not enough. You've got to hear their voices and listen to them and take that into account as you're listening to grow your firm. So think about the different cultural competencies that you may not have now. But if you want to target a market that has different cultural norms than you've got to become educated. You've got to educate yourself, but having people who may be part of that culture can go a long way towards helping you and the rest of your firm understand what the nuances are, right? It's no different than for the last 10 years, we've been telling advisors how to work with women, right? It doesn't mean give them pink reports. It doesn't mean you have to have flowers in every office. It means you have to think about what are the things that women care about. If they're coming to your office, they want it to be in a safe environment. If they are talking to you, they want to make sure that you are having a conversation with them. They may ask questions that are different than some of your male clients ask because they think about things differently. So you've got to come think about this from a cultural perspective as well. Certain cultures may think of money in a different way. It may be a family affair where more than just the husband and wife come to the meeting or come to the Zoom call as it is today. So really understanding that if you're working with LGBTQ couples, understanding the differences, marriage equality, okay, that's great. What does that mean from an insurance perspective? It means you have access to insurance. It doesn't always mean it's employer provided. There can be an additional expense. Think about estate planning for couples like that, right? Their family may not be part of their lives anymore. So there may be complexities there. If you've got a lesbian couple, we already know that women face a deficit in their retirement savings if they've taken time out of work to raise families, also because they can be paid less. So now you've got two people who might have those same challenges saving for retirement. How are you taking a look at their retirement savings? So it's really about educating yourself on what the differences are and what challenges you've got to think about, and become educated on yourself and for the rest of your firm to really do the financial advice the right way.
Mm. It's probably fair to say that this will take a considerable amount of time and energy to do that. This is not a one-day thing, right? This is a life-changing sort of practice or process.
I'd say it's life enhancing,
Hmm.
and exactly, it's not going to be done in a day. But I think if you come to it with a natural curiosity to think about what is it that I don't know about people that I might want to work with, there are things that you can do. You can listen to season 3 of the 2050 Trailblazers podcast that Rianka Dorsonville does, where she actually does cultural competencies of several different cultures. You can listen to that. There have been a plethora of information provided given the social unrest that we've seen this past spring. This is something that is on top of everyone's mind. Diversity and inclusion. There are trainings and certificates being offered by a ton of different, colleges, universities, your own companies. If you're working at a larger firm, they've all got tracks on doing this and having conversations around it. But I think that it's, for some people, this is just the start, and that's great. And so I always tell people, when you're thinking about this, it is hard. Sometimes the conversations are hard, and you're going to mess up. We're all going to mess up. We do. But as long as you come at it with, natural curiosity and respect for people that you're talking to, and you can share with them, like, when I'm out of line, let me know and educate me. I think that's important, and give ourselves all grace as we go through this journey together. Yeah, we're not going to get there overnight, but I'm gratified by seeing the changes that are happening and how quickly some people are really becoming more aware and putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Mm. So, speaking of putting money where the mouth is, the Center for Financial Planning from the CFP board will be holding its 2020 Diversity Summit in November. It'll take place online. It's the third annual summit, and it will feature the release of new thought leadership reports, showcasing case studies of successful D&I practices in the financial services industry that provide metric-driven accountability. Care to share with us what people will be in store for who attend the summit?
Yeah, I think it's great. I don't know, if people haven't been to the first and second summits. The first summit was a very much telling the story in a very emotionally packed way. I think it just kind of raised the awareness. Last year, we started to get a little bit more into what firms are doing, but we think that the best way to really help everyone is to come up with these best practices, right? What are people doing that we can all start to do? And so we're working on those right now. And it's pretty great to see what some firms are doing, sharing those best practices. The challenge that we all have from a diversity perspective is just even knowing, having transparency around what's happening. We saw just last week, Merrill Lynch released the diversity numbers on their on their financial advisors. And that's a great first step, because sometimes people don't realize the problem until you put it in front of them in black and white, right? We've always known there's been a problem of diversity in this industry, but several years ago when the CFP board published that 3.5% of CFPs, and using that as a conduit for the industry, were minorities, that was a wake-up call, right? We kind of suspected, but nobody really knew the number. Now it kind of gives you something to work towards. So for the Diversity Summit that's upcoming, really thinking through what works. And what I love is, we've really been working on this hard. So oftentimes we get, what are the best practices for the large firms? And they've got HR departments, and they've got D&I departments, and they've got all these resources to help. And so we're really concentrating too on how can we help the smaller firms, RIA firms that may not have those large resources, but what can we do to help those firms also think about diversity and inclusion in the setting that they're in, and providing, real resources that they can use, knowing full well that, they don't have talent development. They probably don't have a D&I steering committee or even a chief diversity officer in their firm. But what are the steps that small firms, independent firms, can also take to increase the diversity within their own firms and within their client base?
So during the summit, I've read that there will be actionable recommendations that firms can apply to their D&I efforts. Any hint as to what some of those things might be, or is it still too early?
We're still working through them, and I don't want to give them away, and then people won't come to the summit. I can promise you that every time I'm in one of these meetings, I learn something. I have a whole page of notes every time I talk, because I come away with, each of our firms look at it in a different way. At TD Ameritrade, for instance, we don't have a chief diversity officer. We have 20 chief diversity officers, right? Because we all sit within our businesses, because we don't want this to be an HR directive that comes from the top. We want it to be a real strategy perspective coming from people who are hiring, developing, and managing people. That's where our diversity is going to come from. So we've got, 20 people scattered throughout the business who are concentrating on diversity. I'm not saying, it's right or wrong. It's just that's the way we do it. Some firms have it as a chief diversity officer. Some firms really don't do it, but it comes more from it's employee driven. So they've got employee resource groups that, maybe it's, the Latino community of the firm, or the Black community of the firm, or the LGBTQ community. So, there's all of these different aspects. So I do think that you can pick up a lot of different things. And again, I don't want to steal the CFP board's thunder, and we are still working on some things, right? But I will also say that there are the research paper that we produced last year. It's on the CFP board site. If you go to the CFP board and look at the center initiatives for diversity, we had the first white paper was just on the lack of diversity, but the second paper really talked about some things that firms can do. And now we're really diving deeper and really thinking through all the different business models that make up our industry and what each type can do to create more diversity.
So, if for the benefit of our listeners who may wonder whether they can attend this diversity summit, is it for CFPs only, or is it open to any and all?
I believe it's open to any and all, especially now that it's virtual. I know we've always been capped because of size in the past, but it's not just CFPs. I'm not a CFP, and I go.
So the other notable thing about the CFP board is that in July, its board elected Kamala McDonough, president and partner of Wealth Management Grid 202 Partners, as its 2021 chair-elect. And in doing so, she becomes the first Black woman ever elected to that role. Any thoughts, comments, reaction to that?
I think it's awesome. I know Kamala and worked with her in the past. So, she's got such a passion and dedication to the profession itself, and then to also helping us all from a diversity perspective. She's in good hands. The CFP boards, the board of directors is, getting more diverse. But I think having someone with her background really just also helps people see things through a lens that she's going to bring to the discussions that has been harder to see through that lens when you're working with people who have been part of the majority for so long. So I think I'm really excited. She's going to bring, she's going to bring her mindset to it. She's, a phenomenal leader, and she's going to help the CFP board continue to think through things through someone else's eyes, right? And we all do that. We all say that, right? When we're working with clients, we're trying to really just do what we can from a client perspective and really understand what the client feels. And she's gonna bring that to bear, I believe, at the CFP board. So I think it's a great start, and also because she's gonna have visibility, that's gonna make other Black girls say, "Hey, look at her. That's something that I can do," and bring more awareness to the profession again. So I'm excited to work with her more. And she's chair-elect in 2021, so she's actually not even chair till 2022. So there's a couple of years that we, will absolutely have more visibility from that perspective, which I think is great.
And I know it's not the same, but I recall that Frank Perret had become the first Black man to become president of the Financial Planning Association 3 years ago,
Right.
And paved the way perhaps for people of color being in leadership roles in organizations like FPA and CFP board. So speaking of changes, COVID-19 has changed the way we work. What are your thoughts about some of the maybe temporary changes and some of the permanent changes that we're about to witness?
It has certainly changed. I actually went on to my United app the other day and couldn't remember my password, which is odd since I used to be on that app about 4 times a day. There's been a ton of changes, and I think some of them are positive. Some of them may become permanent or partially permanent. We're certainly learning that technology is something that is our friend and can help us reach people that we might not have been able to reach before. The ability that we have all discovered that we have to work from home. I have worked from home for probably the past 10 years, not permanently, but, 2 days a month or so, just knowing that I have that. So I already had the big screen set up. Thank goodness I didn't I didn't have to worry too much when I made the permanent shift from home. But, for someone like me who spends a lot of time on the road, I've been home since middle of March, and that's been a huge change. But it's been pretty cool to see how we've changed, especially from what I do from, often at conferences and speaking perspective to a virtual environment. Um, you know, Podcasts like this, virtual speaking engagements. We had the Investments in Wealth Institute Women in Wealth session about a month ago. We did I guess, kind of a lunch and learn. I don't know what we called it, but it's been pretty cool. I think that advisors have figured out how to communicate. And what I have seen advisors notice is that they're getting to know their clients in a much different way. Because when the clients came into the office, it was maybe the husband or the wife, or maybe both, but one was really paying attention. And now that they're having Zoom meetings, video chats, they're getting to see the client in their environment. They're getting to see the whole family. They're maybe sitting down with one of the clients, but the spouse might pop in and say, "Oh, hey, Jerry, how you doing? Did Bob ask you about?" Because he was supposed to ask you about this, and starting to see different things. You're seeing the background. You're seeing how many pets they have. You're understanding your client in a whole different way than when they're sitting in your office and you're going through their investments and their financial plan. So I think it's really created a little bit more intimacy in certain ways of getting to know them. It's certainly provided, I think, what's going to be a change is that clients realize they don't have to go to an advisor's office anymore. So that saves them time. And I think it'll be easier to get in touch with your advisor if you don't think you have to drive to their office through traffic after work on your lunch hour, something like that. There's still going to be the place for face to face, but I think you're going to see that there is an opportunity to meet maybe more often virtually. And then advisors have to start to think about, as we all do, right? What does my office space look like? Do I need all that space? Do I need that big conference room? What is more important? Do I have the right equipment for my clients to work virtually with me? Can we co-create a plan? Can we co-browse? Can they see what I'm seeing on the screen? Can I see what they're seeing on the screen? So technology is becoming even more important, but not taking away from the advisor, just allowing the advisor to show their worth through the actual conversations and the behavioral aspects of the relationship with the advisor. Um, Advisors are also, I think, some of them are really taking advantage of getting in front of their clients in different ways, right? This was a challenge from a prospecting perspective for advisors. Even with the clients you work with, fine, you can video chat with them, but what do you do? How do you gain new relationships when you are not in a room with them, when you're not having, whether it's a seminar, a business dinner, something else, you're not at your kids' sporting events because they're not happening. So how are you creating those relationships? And I think it's given advisors the ability to take a step back and say, well, what do I look like on social media? What is my digital presence? How am I showing up? What can I do? Can I tape a podcast, even just a quick video update, a 5-minute market update, and start to post that out there on my website, on social media, start to get themselves out there more. We are seeing advisors who are being able to prospect that way. There's still the referral. This is obviously a big referral business. And I think about when advisors are working with centers of influence, right? Being able to work virtually on a screen, how great is it when you want to have a conversation with someone's accountant and their estate attorney, and the four of you can all get together in one screen at one time and have that conversation. Just thinking of how that's going to strengthen the planning that you're doing for your clients, but also broaden the relationships that you have with centers of influence. And I think that's going to help advisors create business value there. So I think that there's the virtual part of it's here to stay. We're humans. We crave human contact. So we're not always just going to do things virtually. Once things are safe, there will be the ability to, have client appreciation events. They might be a little bit smaller, but I will tell you, they will be much more appreciated when you do them. Think about having a barbecue at a local park or where you can socially distance, or obviously golf has
Hmm.
remained a constant for some folks. I know they can still get out there on the golf course. But there's definitely a lot of changes. And the one that I think is great is that the virtual work is showing that people can work virtually. So my hope is that advisory firms are understanding that they can hire more diverse talent who maybe has different needs. So if you want to hire someone who's a working mom and give her the ability to work from home 3 days a week or 5 days a week or 2 days a week, whatever you all decide, so that she can be there when her kids, well, when they used to go to school or come home from school, but just be there to have those check-ins, but they can still do the work. And I think that to me is the most exciting, is that it's proving that everyone doesn't have to be at their desk to do the job. And so you can start to think about how you bring on more diverse talent. It's also true from an internship perspective, right? We saw this summer that a lot of firms canceled internships, which was a shame. I understand why some firms had to do it, but virtual internships exist. I know many firms who actually just followed through on them. At TD Ameritrade, we continue to have our virtual internships. Our interns did capstone projects for us. I mean, especially when you think of the next generation, they've been doing this forever. I used to laugh at one of my nieces when she lived at college and told me her class was online. Like, I don't understand why you're living there. So they've been doing this virtual interaction for so long, it's second nature to them.
Right.
So there's no reason that you can't then look and say, well, you know what? Maybe there's some really great diverse students that are at a school that's not near my firm, but maybe they can work virtually for me throughout the year. And so that you're expanding that talent pool, you're expanding the diversity, and you're expanding, quite frankly, your client base as you're starting to grow. You think about a client firm, an advisory firm. How are they expanding? This is helping them get into different areas to see if it's a place for them. So I think there's definitely a lot of good that's coming out of the change that has been forced upon us quite quickly, but we're all adjusting and adapting to.
You're right. So, speaking of adapting, there are many young advisors who are listening to this podcast, some of whom are experiencing this kind of disruption to their practice and their clients for the first time. Maybe they weren't around in 2008 or 1987 or 2000. Any words of wisdom for young advisors who are sort of struggling to get their bearings here, their feet under them?
Yeah, you know what? The thing my mom always used to tell me was, "This too shall pass." It's this is something that's happening to all of us. The good news here is kind of this is a shared experience with everyone in the world, which for the first time in my lifetime is really happening, to the extent that it's happening. So I think, don't feel alone. Definitely make sure that you're connecting. It's harder now that everyone's working from home or different places. So, I think for some folks, we really have to think about how are you connecting with people that you can network with. So, that's where things like the Investments in Wealth Institute are so important. When you're a member of an organization like this, reach out, go to the events, network. It's a little bit different when it's on a video than it was when you were in a room and you could go out and grab a cup of coffee or a beer, but it can still happen. And you can always take it offline, meet someone on the Zoom chat, and then follow up on LinkedIn and set up your own time to talk to someone. Because it's important that you know that there are other people who are in this. But the other piece to think about is the pandemic has brought to the forefront the need for financial planning and estate planning for a lot of people. There are a lot of young advisors who are already working in virtual offices. They work with a lot of clients and just, on video the whole time. So they were either working in a shared office setting, or they had an office in their house. So that's, they were already set up in a way. But when you think about what's happened, so many people have lost their jobs, and didn't have that emergency fund. And so they are reaching out to financial advisors to start to talk about that, to talk about what does your legacy planning look like? What does your estate planning look like? People were getting sick that people didn't think would get sick, and things were happening so fast. A lot of people started to think about, what are the things that I really need? How do I adjust my estate plan? What do I think about from a retirement perspective? So I think that there is definitely an opportunity, and think about really working with clients on a different, not on just the AUM model, but think about how you can provide the advice piece, which is what people are craving right now, on a per hour basis or on a subscription model basis or a retainer model basis, because we already knew that the next generation was very keen on getting advice and were willing to pay for it. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that, this upended everyone's lives, and people are taking that step back and trying to figure out who they can talk to, even if they don't have $2 million. And so make sure that you are letting people know that you're here for them, that you can talk to them, and that, you can charge in different ways. It's a great opportunity for young advisors to start a podcast and start to talk about what services they can provide, or just helpful hints. It can be quick. It can be 15 minutes. You record a podcast, buy a mic on Amazon. It's not, they're pretty easy to set up, but it's the way that people consume information now. And I think it's a great way for you to reach out to the people that you're probably most likely to work with anyway. So I think, but make sure that you're also talking to other people through your associations, network with people. It's tough on everyone, but honestly, we're all going to get through this, and we're going to be stronger for it on the other side.
So 2 last things, Kate, if you don't mind. One is Skip is leaving the organization. Any thoughts about that?
You know what? Skip is one of my dearest friends and has done so much for the RIA industry and advocating for the independent advisor that I'm hoping that he's resting. I know Skip, he doesn't rest, but it's sad to see him leave. I worked with him for 12 years, but I know that, he's still the incoming chair of the FPA. You can always find him on a mountain somewhere, and definitely continue to talk to him, and he'll show up somewhere, I'm sure. I think right now he's taking a very well-deserved break, but I keep in touch with him. Obviously, he's just a great mentor, a great leader, a great friend, and hopefully for all of us in the RIA industry, he doesn't take too long of a break and go too far away. But I think he's still very connected through the FPA, so I think we'll continue to see him.
Well, give him my regards on that front, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So anything that we haven't touched upon that you think is worth discussing, or anything that we've already discussed that we should reemphasize?
I think one of the things that I always reemphasize, I think I'm kind of a broken record, but, make sure that you are going out and talking to that next generation, hire them as interns, provide scholarships. It's not that expensive for an advisor to provide a scholarship for someone to study financial planning or finance, or to get one of their certifications. You can $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 to 4 people. I mean, there is a lot advisors can do, and really hire interns. We just launched a new program for advisors to find their next generation talent. It's called RA Connect Next Gen. And so advisors can find that next gen talent, right? And they can find people that are going to be their interns or be their entry level hires. But I just think it's important, if you don't already have a relationship with a financial planning program or a finance program at your local school, get one. Meet the advisor, meet the faculty advisor, talk to the professors, go to your alma mater, but talk to everyone about what you do and develop that next generation of talent. From a monetary perspective, help them with scholarships, but also with your time, because the best way that we've all learned is by listening, talking, and watching someone else do their job. That's a huge development for people.
Well, Kate, I want to thank you once again for being on the Exceptional Advisor podcast. It's always a special treat chatting with you, and I look forward to talking with you again in the near future.
Absolutely, Bob. And then hopefully maybe we'll even see each other someday.
That would be great. Look forward to that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Bob.
Our pleasure. Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Exceptional Advisors podcast series. My guest was Kate Healy, the Managing Director for Generation Next at TD Ameritrade Institutional. This episode is brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute's Women in Wealth program. Don't miss the upcoming Women in Wealth webinar, September 22nd, 11:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Learn more about Women in Wealth, upcoming events, and how you can get involved by visiting iwicentral.org/Women in Wealth. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then don't miss our Exceptional Advisor webinar series hosted by Tony Davidow, available at investmentsandwealth.org. Stay up to date and have the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast delivered straight to you by subscribing through iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Institute stands ready to help you as you navigate these turbulent times with new resources, research, programs, accommodations for candidates and certificates. For more details on resources available, visit www.investmentsandwealth.org.